You are listening to Things You Should Know, and I'm your host, Andy Ngo. In this episode, I speak with Carl Benjamin, also known by his YouTube alias, Sargon of Akkad. Benjamin originally gained prominence during the Gamergate controversy in 2014 as a critic of third-wave feminism and social justice. Since then, his following has ballooned to over 800,000 followers, but he's also attracted a sizable community of detractors, like the Southern Poverty Law Center, who accuse him of being a misogynist and alt-right sympathizer. I spoke with the popular British video blogger to see if I could illuminate his controversial views. What do you do on your YouTube?
I do political commentary mostly.
About what?
About contemporary politics, about mostly the sort of culture war that's happening in the West between a particularly authoritarian variant of progressivism, a particularly hard left variant of it, and almost everyone else who just wants to be left alone.
What is your personal worldview or philosophy? Distill it for me.
Yeah, I'm an English liberal, so I think that liberal democracy is the best and most successful political system that we've invented yet, especially when it comes to preventing tyranny. I mean, it's because I'm concerned about tyranny that I look at what social justice activists do, and it looks very much like tyranny. I'm concerned with preserving personal freedom, and so naturally I have to oppose the censorious, oppressive left whenever I see them, because I see them everywhere. They're on college campuses, they're in my government, they make laws for my country, and I mean, you don't have to approve of things that your political opposition do, but I mean, you can't just prevent them from expressing themselves, no matter how offensive something is. That's my biggest concern, is the fundamental illiberal nature of what the left is doing at the moment.
Why is your message resonating with so many people online?
I think there's a kind of taboo about talking about this in frank terms, because normally the people who promote it under the guise of altruism and charity, when what they're actually doing is the opposite. What they're doing is trying to establish dominion over people. And they're very aggressive about that. And there are lots of individuals that we can point to who have felt intimidated or have been directly persecuted as a result of their opposition to the ideological goals of this group of activists. And I think that the fact that I'm willing to speak frankly about this, because it looks like a strategy to me, rather than it looks like a tactic, a strategy, like a military operation, more than it looks like any kind of activism. And they don't seem to care who they hurt. They seem to be able to target anyone, even of these protected classes, despite apparently advocating for the protected class itself. And I think the fact that I'm willing to point that out is something that attracts people, because I think a lot of people see it.
So any cursory Google search of you will one can find a whole list of accusations against you and who you allegedly are and what you believe. I'm going to go through some of them with you. I'd like you to address. So first of all, are you a men's rights activist, an MRA?
No, but I'm not a women's rights activist either. I'm a human rights activist. I don't make distinctions when it comes to things like that. And if I saw, for example, I'm in favour of Ireland legalising abortion. I'm in favour of this. And so, I was pleased to see it happen. If I see that men are the overwhelming majority of suicides, and, for example, young men are failing academically, young men are failing to abide by the law and going into life of crime and ending up in jail, making poor young men make up massively disproportionate amount of this, and it seems to stem from fatherlessness, then I think I have a duty to point that out, because that's something that appears to be... I think you could quantify that as a form of oppression. It's very difficult to escape from. And so, I think I've got a duty to point these things out, as much as when I see women's oppression or gay oppression or something like this. It's just there seem to be very, very large and very well-organised activist groups for these things already, And they seem to want to blame, basically, straight white men for these problems. And straight white men are not doing particularly well at the moment. So I don't think that's nearly as cut and dried as they'd like it to be.
Do you think historically it makes sense for there to be women's rights activism? Okay.
Absolutely. I mean, historically, women didn't have the same rights as men, but now they do, at least broadly. I mean, there are actually examples where they don't, and where men don't have rights that women have. But this is like the margins of things. And I think that if we were to just change the way we think about it from being men's and women's to humans, and what can a human do? Because, I mean, it's not like people have rights in conflict with each other's rights. So, I mean, I can't see why we can't just be neutral on the subject of gender rather than trying to, right historic injustices or something. You know, you can't change the past. It's ridiculous. But we can plan how we're going to move forward in the future. And if we want the state to be a neutral arbiter on gender, then we need to actually institutionalize that than continuing to choose particular favourites with gender. And the state, in my country, the state is actually incredibly patriarchal when it comes to the courts as well. The judges they treat women as if they are second-class inferior citizens, and it is in many times that an attractive young woman who does something particularly violent, like stabs her boyfriend or something like this, and this is in recent months this has happened, that the judge will say, well, she's got a promising career as a lawyer or something, so I'm going to let her off. And it's like, that's clearly the judge being operating from a sort of traditionalist mindset, and I don't think it follows the spirit of the laws, the sort of spirit of the laws that we're trying to capture there. And that's my concern about these things.
You gained prominence around the time of Gamergate, and it was from Gamergate summarizes was basically, as reported in the mainstream press, was that a lot of sexist and misogynist men were pushing back on women in the video game industry who were trying to advocate for more visibility or leadership. Now, because of that association that you were connected to, that Gamergate, there's also then accusations towards you that you are sexist.
Oh,
yes.
Strange. No one ever makes those accusations to me.
How do you? Well, misogynist is one that I frequently.
Well, that's not so much an allegation as it is an attack these days. It's the same as using the word racist. I mean, for example, like what you're saying there about Gamergate, that is just rhetoric. That's progressive rhetoric about every single one of their enemies in every domain. They claim implicitly to represent women, which they don't. In fact, often what far left progressives want is in direct conflict with what the average woman wants. And so, but taking on this advocacy mantle allows them to at least make the narrative that they are the defenders of women. So if you're attacking, or not attacking, but opposing the incremental social control that's desired by social justice advocates and their subsequent rise to power on what I consider to be illegitimate means, as in they would be trying to institute some kind of tyrannical regime within a particular space. And they do this a lot. It's hard to find a space that hasn't been in conflict with social justice activists who have entered into it and then tried to change it. Anyone who opposes this process is pathologized as a sexist, a racist, a misogynist, whatever word you want to use. But these are not accurate descriptions of what's actually happening. And it becomes a convenient narrative because the narrative itself becomes a method of attack, a method of delegitimization. Most people in Gamergate we actually did political compass polling on people. And most people were either right or left libertarians, mostly left actually. And most of them were just sick of being told that they were bad people for not towing the line.
What do you think the role of women should be in society?
Whatever they want it to be. It's up to them.
You have received some attention by some advocacy groups, particularly the Southern Poverty Law Center in the United States.
Oh, do they have an article on me?
Yeah, they have several.
Oh, do they?
On Hate Watch, actually.
Oh.
So, I wanted to ask you about that. you've been labeled, quote, a fellow traveler of Richard Spencer and the alt-right.
Right, okay, that's very interesting.
Is there any basis to that?
Only as a political attack. I think that you would have to not know very much about the alt-right to think that my goals were in line with theirs. The alt-right is broadly the bastard child of the regressive left, the far left. As in, they have decided that they want to play identity politics, and they can have each group, and each group can aspire to political power. And they have told white people that they are not allowed to play this game, and the alt-right are the white people who want to play this game. I don't want to play this game at all, so I oppose the alt-right. And if you Google alt-right Sargon, or go on their spaces, go to their subreddits, and just ask them what they think of me. I've spent the last sort of 6 months in a kind of conflict with them, I suppose, ideologically, and they're not happy that I don't agree with them. I'm an individualist and they're collectivists, and that's as fundamental as the schism between them is between me and the social justice warriors. We can never agree because their methods are just generally wrong and their ideas are generally wrong.
Well, the SPLC points to how you have engaged with Millennial Woes, who is on the alt-right, as well as Jared Taylor, who is a white nationalist thinker.
Absolutely.
So do you use your platform of hundreds of thousands to give voice to the alt-right? I
do, and I challenge their ideas in that space. And that's what I think a dialogue should be. And the thing is, I don't know why people are afraid of that, because is there anyone who thinks that I can only assume that again, this is an allegation you only hear from people on the far left, and that's where you're getting it from to get me to answer it, isn't it? You're not getting this from far right people. It's always the same group of people who will say, well, you're giving a platform to the alt-right. It's okay, but their ideas are terrible. No one wants to have White Lives Matter marching down the street. It was embarrassing to watch Charlottesville before it became a catastrophe when someone got killed. It was no one wants what they're offering. And so the best thing to do is to do what we did with the British National Party in England, which was to actually give them the platform they're looking for, to expose their ideas, because then people can see what they're about. And their ideas haven't taken hold. In fact, if anything, I think they're becoming a far less potent force because of the exposure that they've had. And I think that's a damn good thing.
The SPLC also issued a report where they said you were part of a stepping stone for some white nationalists on the path to radicalization. That's the quote. Do you think there's any legitimacy to the claim that because you're, I guess, tangentially connected through this quote-unquote stepping stone, that makes you somewhat culpable?
No, not at all. I guess I would like to make them culpable for the communists who hide amongst their mist as well, but I think that's too far. No, I don't agree. I oppose the alt-right, and the alt-right know that, and they vast swathes of it loathe me for it. So, yeah, no, I don't agree that I'm culpable for any of it. In fact, I'm a bulwark against it.
So writer Joe Bish at Vice listed you on a list of its right-wing British blowhards.
Oh.
Are you right-wing?
Whenever I do a political compass test, I tend to figure centre-left, about halfway down into the green. Generally because I'm more than accepting of socialised healthcare and a social safety net. I think these are legitimate functions of the state as in line with regular liberal theory, and you can read Hayek says the same thing in The Road to Serfdom. They're not a violation of individual rights. It's just that this is now a pragmatic negotiation on what role the state should have, and it turns out that a socialised healthcare system is actually just cheaper overall than private healthcare. It's like, okay, well, and I remember growing up like watching American TV programs when I was like 15, and then someone would get sick and then they'd go bankrupt, and I'd be like, oh my God. And then learning about the NHS and just being overly relieved, just actual like, oh my God, thank God, I'm not going to have to worry about money if I get sick. I think on a human scale, the kind of society that you want to build, I think that's a damn fine addition, and I think it's a legitimate function of the state. It's up if you want it. It's not mandatory, but I think so. I think they're good things. But yeah, I tend to end centre left because I mean I'm very like culturally libertarian. You know, I mean, what consenting adults do is none of my business as long as they're not harming anyone else. So.
Why does the press and left-wing advocacy groups then describe you as on the right or even far right? Well,
I mean, from their perspective, everything looks right. Everything that's not in line with their beliefs is very right-wing. I've been told outright now that just liberalism is right-wing. So, okay. Well, I'm not going to stop being a liberal because you've decided to move places on the political spectrum. But I mean, the political spectrum is broadly arbitrary anyway. But I think they use it because effectively what they're doing is a tactic. The whole point is for delegitimization. Because the left have been hiding behind the label liberal because it's, after the 20th century, it was the only ideology left standing with any credibility. And the left has been hiding behind that with sharpened knives in the form of socialism. And the socialists are now confident about their numbers and they're trying to normalize the idea of socialism. And I think it's something we need to be wary of. And I think they're aware that I'm aware that that's happening and that's part of their strategy. And because I'm attacking them directly, then they have to delegitimize me entirely. It's all part of a war for your mind, basically.
I'm going to go back to the topic of women. You dismiss the accusation of misogynistic views as an attack. But you said things have gotten you quite a bit in trouble. For example, the most well-known, probably I would say, is when you tweeted to British MP Jess Phillips, quote, "I wouldn't even rape you." Now, I want to give you an opportunity in your own words, without me putting any spin on it. Describe it. What did you mean? Why?
Well, I mean, I've got a very strict no raping policy. I'm not under any accusation of any Me Too allegations. But no, seriously though, I mean, have you ever seen debates in the House of Parliament?
It's a ruckus.
Yes, exactly. That's what our politics is like. And so Jess Phillips is more than aware that what I did was provocative, and that was what it was for.
But you received quite a strong backlash in the UK as well.
Yeah, it's because it was deliberately provocative. But Jess Phillips tweeted out that she didn't care, that she wasn't bothered. And then she went on Victoria Live and said, no, this doesn't bother me at all. I was in my back garden playing with my children. That she understood that this was part of a political stratagem, and she actually responded really cleverly to it. It's everyone else who have been making themselves look hysterical. But from a British perspective, it's quite obvious what's happened there.
What about her views made you think that this tweet was warranted?
The fact that she literally laughs at the plight of men. I suppose this is why people call me an MRA, but I'm sorry. It was open. Jess Phillips is a radical feminist, and she's in our parliament, and she is an open bigot towards men. And she's been effectively bullying an MP called Philip Davies. If you read her book, Every Woman, she actually describes the quote-unquote feminist sisterhood that operates within the parliament with which she can pull strings. And she was in an interview with Philip Davies where he had applied to get a debate on International Men's Day for issues that are facing men, like failing in education or suicide rates. And Jess Phillips was actively shutting him down and mocking him while she was doing it. And it was infuriating to me because Philip Davies was just trying to address a legitimate problem that people in his constituency were concerned about. Why do my male relatives keep committing suicide? Can we please have some sort of social debate about this? And there was another time in Parliament where she literally laughed at the idea of men getting help, and it was she is unbelievable. And so I had to let her know. The attached to that tweet was actually a video, but the thing is, she already had me blocked because I'd argued with her on Twitter previously, and so I wanted them to know that I'd made this video, because otherwise they would have just ignored me. This is what I deliberated for hours over the word "even" in that tweet, and literally for about an hour I deliberated over it. So I was like, right, they're going to be really annoyed about it, but is it a threat? Is there any interpretation of that can be considered a threat? And the answer is no, it's just offensive. And so, okay, well, that's fine. I don't mind being offensive. If we have to have a conversation about things, then we have to have a conversation about things.
So you don't have a regret?
Oh, not at all. No.
You don't apologize?
No, not even slightly. I'm never going to rape Jess Phillips. Not even in her wildest dreams.
What did you mean when... Okay, so with the Me Too movement, a lot of people are using the occasion to speak up about their experiences with sexual assault or even rape. A lot of people, that takes a lot of courage and bravery. Although I understand that in social media as well, where some claims can not be verified, it's easy to embellish certain stories and get praise. But nonetheless, I still think for people to speak out about this without shame is a monumental change for good. But you said in a video that, quote, "I don't agree with publicizing these things." And I want to know what you meant by that.
Okay, so Me Too does represent a real problem in places like Hollywood. It is a genuine problem that existed that was about female exploitation on the casting couch. It's a genuine issue that had to come to light. And then you can see the movement getting co-opted by people with an agenda. And it's not just about giving women a platform to speak and be supported on. That's something everyone can agree with. And I mean, I think police reports are the most important thing. I'm very tired of seeing Twitter accusations. It becomes like a Twitter inquisition. And we can see it going too far. And I mean, in the atheist community, there have been... It's almost like scalping these famous atheists with ridiculous stories of like... They're always published in BuzzFeed, and they're always after a quote-unquote extensive investigation that has anonymous sources and he said, she said stories. For example, I think it's the one against Krauss, or maybe it was Silverman, but I can't see. There are so many, I can't remember which one it was that happened. But basically, there was an allegation of a drunken fumble, but at no point in this allegation was it stated that this was non-consensual. It was just heavily implied that afterwards it was regretted and therefore retroactively became non-consensual. I'm sorry, that's just not how it works. You know, if you had a fumble with this guy, okay, you regret it the next day, okay, but you did consent to that. You know, you're not a child. You made the decision and you have to live with that. And but so basically, I've seen too many of these witch hunts, and they just ruin people's lives, and often they're decent people who don't deserve it. You know, getting Harvey Weinstein and his close cronies and whatnot, the absolute necessary job, but now it's getting too far.
So for people who are victims of sexual assault, where because of maybe statutes or limitations that they don't have a legal recourse, and at that time for whatever reason did not go to police, should they just remain silent?
Unfortunately, what can you do? You know, I'm not saying they should remain silent, but the allegation itself isn't enough to destroy a person, or shouldn't be enough to destroy a person, because if it's decades ago, where's the evidence? You know, if they didn't go to the police, if a report wasn't filed, if there is no evidence that the attack took place, we can't just convict people on goodwill for the person who's making the allegation, because we don't know that they're actually a virtuous person. They might be lying. We've got to take that into consideration.
Are you concerned that perhaps you then make yourself desensitized when there may be real instances of racism or bias that should be addressed?
People, I mean, I think a lot at this point, people are just sick of hearing about racism. You know, I think a lot of people just want to get on with their daily lives. And it probably does create a fertile ground for people who maybe want to push actually racist ideas under the cover of, no, they just call it racist. Probably is a legitimate worry.
Okay, you travel a lot between the US and the UK. Do you think that racism is systemic to both societies?
No, not
or one of them.
Not even slightly. I mean, we're the least racist societies that have ever existed. We're actively anti-racist in our philosophy. I mean, we're the ones who decided racism was even bad. We ended slavery. We are the birthplace of emancipatory movements, and yet we're constantly flagellating ourselves as if we are the worst of the worst in the world. And it's ridiculous, either Britain or America. I mean, There was a survey done about who would you be accepting of a neighbour of another race, and I mean, like something like 95% plus of Britain and America said that would be fine, and then you have places like India which say absolutely not.
So in addition to your YouTube audience, you have people who are coming to see you in real life, and in that audience, I saw a lot of people with Kakistan flags and doing the OK hand symbol, and I'm not very well versed in these meme and internet cultures, but I guess maybe if I was to take it at face value, I do think it's potentially problematic, or at least eyebrow raising. And I'm wondering if you could help explain to people who maybe will see photos and videos of your fans and will interpret as these are dog whistles to the alt-right or white nationalists.
Yeah, so Richard Spencer tweeted out, it started with kind of a hashtag Free Kekistan. It was a satire of identity politics to create an identity for what are on the internet called shit posters, people who just like posting funny and provocative things so everyone can enjoy them for the comedy value they provide. And it kind of grew wildly out of my control into a giant parody of identitarianism as a whole. And the alt-right have tried to kind of reappropriate this, but they've come to the point now where they just loathe it.
You said on your YouTube channel that you don't think Britain is a free country, and you actually go quite at lengths of how you describe many of Britain's policies as very authoritarian in regards to speech. Can you elaborate on that more?
Yeah, I mean, we certainly don't have the freedoms that you have in the United States. I mean, the First Amendment protection you have here is a freedom we don't have in Britain. And it's the reason that thousands of people a year are being arrested over social media posts, which are considered to be, quote-unquote, hateful and hate speech. This is, in my opinion, a massive overreach of the legitimate remit of the government. I don't care what the government's opinion on my speech is, hateful or not. And I've never fallen foul of hate speech laws either. I just consider it a dramatic overreach of government authority. I don't think it serves the people that they are supposed to be serving. And I think the problem that we have, really, the reason that hate speech laws are so dangerous and so pernicious is because communities can't normalize the differences between each other, between themselves. And they can't ever, and that's a barrier, in my opinion, to integration. Giving the example of like Muslim communities in Britain, if you make the identity of Muslim a protected characteristic, while allowing criticism of Islam, it fulfills the obligation to allow criticism of religion. But the identity itself is directly connected to it, and so you're kind of hamstrung from really how far you can go in your criticism. And the ability to be offensive to one another is to be part of a negotiation for the set of values, the system of values that the society is going to be run by. So there can be trust between one community and another, that they follow the same values. And often it can be ugly, it can hurt people's feelings. But I think it's a necessary step towards integration into liberal polities. And preventing that, I think, is creating a kind of open wound where these communities are constantly engaged in a friction they can't properly resolve.
You've spoken very critically about Islam and Muslim immigration and even Muslim communities in Britain. Are you Islamophobic? I
don't really care for the word Islamophobia because, I mean, in its like most literal form, an irrational fear isn't something anyone has to apologize for because they didn't reason themselves into it and they can't help being irrational in that way. So I mean, it's a silly word, but the implication is you have an unfair dislike of Islam, which I don't think is something that is anyone else's business. I mean, Islam is a system of beliefs. It's not a race. It's not even a culture. You do get culture springing out of it, but at its most basic form, I totally disagree with the theocratic beliefs of Islam, and the value system underlying it is illiberal at best. And so we come to a position like, if I've got to compare my own value system to the value system laid down by fundamentalists, then sure, I don't like Islam. But there are many Muslims who effectively compromise on these things and kind of modernize Islam by adopting liberal axioms and then filtering Islam through those. And you come out with and obviously with any ancient text, you just cherry pick the parts you want. And when they do this, they come out with a very peace and love and tolerance form of Islam, cherry picking the good bits, and there are good bits. Like you can read Muhammad's last sermon; it's very progressive, and you can construct a narrative of like Western Islam that way, but that's not the majority of Islam. And in many ways, by Muslim communities, these people are considered not to be Muslims because they're not working from basic Muslim values. And so, like, I would be afraid to live under these values, even though I, as a man, would actually benefit tremendously from them. I would find the weight on my conscience too much to bear.
The point is taken on the term Islamophobia. I used it quite on purpose. I myself have written critically about that term. It's a political term that tries to evoke some of the same emotions that people get in response to terms like homophobia. But the way you speak about Islam just now, your criticism seems to be more against fundamentalist or literalist Islam, but you don't use that qualifier, and I want to know why. It doesn't even matter to you.
Well, yeah, I mean, really, the question is, does it matter? Because whenever ideological arguments occur, it's the fundamentalists that ultimately win them, because they argue from the values of the ideology itself rather than from a pragmatic position of compromise. I mean, if you're in a debate with an ideologue, then compromise is weakness, and so they can say that they are the most pure, most literal and most right interpretation of the ideology, and it doesn't matter which ideology this is. And if you've already agreed that these principles are good principles, then the person closest to them is the most virtuous, and you are being deliberately unvirtuous when you compromise on these things because you live in the real world and you understand that, and also because you may agree that there are other axioms that are also important. So, I mean, when I say Islam, I'm talking about the most sort of like base fundamentalist version that you'd get in a Wahhabi mosque or something like that. You know, the sort of, because that's the worst part about Islam is the most pure. Like, I can't understand when people say like ISIS aren't real Muslims. It drives me crazy because they are just choosing parts of the Quran that the liberal Muslims don't choose. It's like, okay, that doesn't mean it's not in the Quran. And if you believe the Quran is the literal word of God, then you have to believe that God literally said, you have to kill these people for these reasons. You can pick and choose if you're more liberal minded, that's fine. But if you genuinely were a religious zealot and you believed this was the literal word of God, then you would feel morally obligated not to ignore this. I mean, I'm talking about Islam on its own terms, as if it was the religious word, the literal word of God. You would have to treat it with each bad part with the same gravity as the good parts.
Britain's approach to its immigrants has to adopt a policy of multiculturalism, which simplified basically means that communities are encouraged to keep their distinct identities through, for example, community representatives, institutions that are more, in a way, atomized to specific communities, and they're left kind of alone. You described yourself basically as a libertarian in many ways, but at the same time, you've also have talked about multiculturalism being a big failure in the UK. So I'm trying to wonder, how do you reconcile these two things? You want people to be left alone, but this policy of leaving immigrant communities alone is, in your view, has brought up a lot of social issues.
Actually, it's not as contradictory as you think. When I say leaving people alone, that means leaving them alone. That doesn't mean they will leave each other alone. And the people on the fringes of these communities, as they interface with other communities, will have the negotiations of how culture will operate between them, the set of values that they will agree upon to build trust between the communities. Because what we have at the moment is a group of effectively armed camps that are going to be defended by law against any offence or trespass against one another, and so they're going to be on watch and guardful against the other people. But if those barriers are lifted, and we say, right, we're not going to police the social interactions between you. That's for you guys to agree, and it's in everyone's interest to agree to something that's pretty pluralistic, so we can all just get along with our lives as we want to live them. People from different value systems, to form trust within an area, a geographical area, people have to know that there is a basic value system that they share with their neighbours, and this is why Christians in this country find atheists so hard to trust, because if you're not working from Christian principles, then they think that you're effectively acting from no principles. You're incredibly nihilistic and you can't be trusted. And when the atheists in this country have basically been having a cultural negotiation with the Christians, say, look, we're not just going to go around mass murdering. We do have sets of beliefs of right and wrong. In Britain, we've got these laws that are preventing these things from happening, and so more and more mistrust in each community is building up, especially when you see one community has done something negative to another community. And if that community isn't punished for those actions, or it seems to be unfairly protected by the state, which I think a lot of people do perceive that to be, then a lot of resentment is going to build up about that. And all of this could be spared if people were allowed to just speak their mind, even if that's horrible or offensive.
What are you seeing in the UK that makes you come to the conclusion that multiculturalism is a failure?
The fact that these communities aren't interfacing very well at all. I mean, it's hard to say that gangs of Muslim men who are predatory towards young white girls because they're young white girls and not Muslim, and sometimes Sikh as well, but because they're worthless, there is thousands and thousands and thousands of young girls all across Britain have suffered this. And the working class communities in the north are the ones suffering it. It's their daughters, their sisters, and they are furious. And you can see this in response to Tommy Robinson going to jail. I don't think Tommy was in the right with what he was doing, but it doesn't matter because these people are desperate to have this conversation had. That the Muslim communities, because of the protections they're being given and the ease with which, the lax way they're being reined in by the authorities, because of the fear of the word racist, by the way, it's really hurting these communities and they're getting really resentful. Honestly, it's kind of scary. It's a scary trajectory we're going in. And most of this is left-wing policies that have created this situation as well.
Are you engaging in collective guilt?
No. I mean, it's an interesting appeal. Like, we were talking specifically in terms of communities a second ago, and suddenly, as soon as I say this, it's collective guilt. But I'm a white man. How dare I exercise my privilege in this way? The thing is, these communities aren't atomized. People. I mean, you can't have these grooming gangs operate in a community and no one else in the community know. These things. I mean, there are allegations that the counsellors and police had sex with the victims of these grooming gang girls. There was one girl she was taken by a Muslim man. She's a 13, 14-year-old girl, raped by him. She escapes, and in her haggard state, is grabbed by another couple of Muslim men who then take her just separate, independent. And then after escaping them, she gets captured by another guy who phones up 5 of his friends to come round, and they rape her for 24 hours. And it's just this is a community problem, and it's because of a system of values that they share. It's coming from religion. They say this in their court, and so it's well, is this collective guilt? No, they just all happen to have a similar system of values, and this sort of thing happens. I mean, what do you want me to say? That it seems to be a community problem.
A common response that I do frequently hear from, I guess you would say, apologists of Islam is that it's not Islam, it's culture. Sometimes that's they're willing to concede at that, I guess, in their minds. And that is something I do frequently find annoying. But in the particular case of the rape gangs in the UK, I do think there's legitimacy in viewing it as a cultural issue rather than religious, just because you don't see the same phenomenons repeated frequently enough in other types of Muslim communities. Particularly, I'm thinking of the United States. In some states have very large Arab Muslim communities, and you don't see this phenomenon repeated.
Yeah, it seems that the Muslim communities in America are smaller and more directly exposed to the surrounding culture.
I bring that up because I'm trying to see if if maybe instead of saying Muslim rape gangs, Pakistani, South Asian.
That's not fair though, because they're not all Pakistani. The thing that was uniting them was the identity of Muslim. And it was because these girls were non-Muslim, Sikhs and white girls, that they were targeted. They wouldn't target Muslim women. They would only target non-Muslim women. And it's because the non-Muslim women, and this is why I refuse to divorce religion from this, because this comes from religious values of the women not dressing modestly, not being part of a household, and not being Quranically correct, effectively. They weren't covering up, and so they were treated like prostitutes, and they were literally, in the court cases, they would use words like worthless, which is unacceptable in a liberal democracy. We assume that even the worst person has some worth. But like the example of the girl who got raped in three separate occasions in the same day while escaping from rapists, it's beyond the pale. These communities, their values are something we need to talk about. I'm not saying that every single one of them is like this, obviously, but it's not a rare occurrence if that happens, and it needs to be talked about because it's about a certain kind of in-group, out-group preference that we can't allow to continue to be fostered because it's causing real problems. Like these girls are being brutally raped, and some have died, and people were, well, that might be offensive. No, okay, they can be offended. Let's have the proper conversation about who believes what here. Because this can't go on. And like I said, it's the working class communities are getting really angry. Really angry. Every time I've seen Tommy Robinson, right? Every time. And I've only spent a few hours with him, really, in total. When we're wandering around the streets, some rough-looking working class lad will see him. He'll look around, and then walk over to him, shake his hand, and then just say something like, "Thanks very much," and then just walk off. And it's... like it's totally different when people who like me recognize me. 'Cause when people who like me recognize me, they come up and they're very loud and very excited to see me. It's a very public thing. No, they don't think about hiding their affection for me. But the people who come up to Tommy Robinson absolutely do. But they do it anyway, and it happens. I mean, like I was for the Day for Freedom March, we did a little promo video thing. So I was with him for like an hour. And in the course of this hour, 3 different people had come up to him and shaken his hand in exactly the same way. And it was just like, yeah, there's something quite worrisome breeding here. And so I think it's time that we establish what system of values is the acceptable system to create trust in Britain in general, between these communities. Because at the moment, I mean, it's not just the rape gangs. Like there are regular gangs that go around bullying white kids. This is why the English Defence League was created, because of Muslim gangs surrounding around the identity of Muslim that were effectively staking out patches of territory where non-Muslims can go, when they don't want non-Muslims to go. And like we've seen this in Sweden and Denmark as well. It's not a unique phenomenon, and the left just have to start accepting that there is a problem that we have to address, and calling people names over it is really unproductive. And it probably does open the door to the far right going, you know what, fuck it, we'll just do that then. And it's like, no, I don't want to just mass, I do not want any solution to the problem to come from the government. I don't want it to be government intervention. It has to be a negotiation between the communities on the level of the individual who are living in these communities. But if the white people feel the need to say something nasty, well then okay. Okay. That's the way it has to be then, because these communities are treating the white communities worse first. And I say this because we have loads of different immigrant communities in Britain. We have the world's largest number of Sikhs outside of India, I think, Hindus outside of India. And we've got a large Sikh community, a Gurkha community, and you don't see any problems between the native Brits and these communities, but it is with Muslim communities. And I'm sorry, there's something about the identity and the system of values that we have to discuss. End of story.
You're using a lot of language of in-group, out-group. Do you think that, are you not concerned that path, that way of thinking leads to more identity politics?
It doesn't have to be identity politics. It can be any group based on anything. It can be party affiliation.
Muslim versus white?
Yeah, but I mean, Muslim isn't an immutable characteristic. That's why you get ex-Muslims, who are one of the most persecuted demographics in my country, incidentally, because they're often trapped through familial ties inside communities that hate them. I actually met a lad who'd been stabbed in the thigh by a gang of Muslim men who were trying to kill him for being an apostate. So, and again, we have to talk about the values that come from Islam, and the left is really afraid of having these conversations because they've taken on Muslims as a victim class, when in my state, in my country, they're anything but.
What is it about your message that you get hundreds of thousands of subscribers, and when you go make tour stops, hundreds of people are coming in person, crossing straight lines, or even crossing country borders to see you? What is it about your message?
I think it's because I'm being honest. I mean, I'm not condemning the Muslims at wholesale. Like I said, there are many liberal Muslims who filter their religious view through a liberal lens, and so they come out as lovely people, and they integrate well into society. These people are in large cosmopolitan cities, and they get along very well. I suspect that many of them in America are basically the same sort of person. I mean, I saw a survey that compared to American Muslims to British Muslims. American Muslims are more progressive than your Christians. They're very forward thinking, and I think it's cultural contact and intimacy between these cultures that creates this. It transmits values across because the value is demonstrable. You can see that this is a better result that comes from one system of values than another. And in my country, this is because in your country you don't have hate speech laws. You can't be prosecuted for hate speech. And so anyone can say anything they want to this other community, and the other community has to take that on board and go, right, why are my neighbours angry with the fact that I'm raping their daughters? Maybe I'm doing something wrong. It's a way of like hammering out the values. The values will evolve until they're mutually compatible and they're mutually acceptable between you and your neighbour. Normally this is really simple. It's non-interference. In Britain we figured this out centuries ago. But in Britain, we're currently being prevented from having those negotiations with the Muslim communities, and so I think that it's really, really, really pissing people off.
What are the issues affecting men that people don't care about?
Fatherlessness, definitely. No, number one issue. The idea that children can get along without their fathers is just wrong. There's a mountain of literature to demonstrate this. Delinquency, crime, arrests, gangs, murders, it all comes mostly from children who didn't have fathers, young men without fathers. Unfortunately, there's just no getting around it. Not having a father in the house is bad for a young man. And so we need to have a frank conversation about that.
Does the patriarchy exist?
No.
No.
No, what feminists call the patriarchy is Western liberal meritocracies. Men work harder than women.
As I'm listening to you talk about gender, men, women, I hear a lot of echoes of Jordan B. Peterson. And I'm thinking, I wonder if we could have predicted his exponential rise by seeing as well how you have such a big audience as well. Do you think there's crossover in your fans?
Oh, undoubtedly. I actually went to see him speak in London a while ago, and I thought I'd be able to just sit in the audience, but there was a big line of people who wanted selfies with me. I didn't even think about it. It just didn't occur to me. I was just like, this would be fun. But yeah, I mean, the crossover is basically on method, I think. It's not, I think, like people like myself and Jordan Peterson, it's not that we're not concerned about oppression, it's that we are concerned about oppression. And there's no point replacing one with another if the problem is oppression itself. And I mean, he's got a very individualistic outlook on life, as I do. And when you have an individualistic outlook, you're looking more for self-empowerment. I mean, I don't think there is such a thing as social justice. I think that anything that is described as social justice is inherently incorrect, because I don't think that you can have this kind of group justice now that we're in a system that doesn't have directed group injustice. What you have is people operating within a system that's fairly neutral. It's the people themselves that aren't. And that's a negotiation we have to have with one another about, our cultural standards. But the system itself, I think, is as good as we're really reasonably going to get it, at least, and retain a meritocratic characteristic. And I think that's important to keep us competitive, because we've got to remember that the West, we're not the only powers in the world. And I think there's something more romantic to aiming for excellence rather than succumbing to mediocrity as well. And this is another thing I really despise about the far left, is the low standards they have for people who they consider to be non-white. They have this real habit of believing they just can't get ahead without their help, and I don't think that's true. I think we should have a bit more faith in them.
You have a lot of criticisms for the left and the far left. What are your criticisms for the right and the far right?
Well, broadly they're the same. It's just the far right was completely discredited after the Second World War. And so far right collectivist ideologies. I mean, I don't even know if it's fair to call these things far right. I've been thinking about this a lot, because they like to say that the Nazis weren't socialist, but they really were. They were actually really hyper-socialist. I mean, Hitler wanted to, in his words, socialize people to the point, the Marxists were actually kind of a bit more basic about it. They just wanted to socialize all the property. The Nazis and the fascists in Italy wanted to go far further and really collectivize the entire nation to the point where each person was almost, just not an indistinguishable unit, but was comprehensively for the collective rather than for their own individual choices and hobbies and interests, which is the great distinction really between them and liberalism and the sort of British liberal tradition. And so I don't even know if it's fair to delineate calling them even far right, because they represent a paradigm that's so radically different to the paradigm I operate in intellectually that, I mean, all of the same criticisms I would make to the left are directly applicable to the right. I just don't make them to the right because I don't see any Nazi professors on campuses. I don't see any, and I know people are going to say Donald Trump, but he's not a fascist. He's not a collectivist. Not in the same way that they're thinking, and certainly not a Nazi. I mean, he's got Jews in his family, for Christ's sake.
You don't think he's dog whistles to white anxiety?
Yeah, but white anxiety, I mean...
That's a collective fear.
Yeah, sure it is. It may well even be a racial demographic fear, but that doesn't mean that they're Nazis. I would think it was more of a cultural fear, but maybe that's because I come from Britain. Maybe it is more of a racial fear over here. But I mean, how is that illegitimate? These people seem to hate white people. I see far worse things said about white people than I do black people. That's only because I see the media and I don't really follow the alt-right online, And they've got such a bigger reach, and all of the criticisms are valid. It's unfair to target an entire group because of an arbitrary characteristic. Well, am I talking about white men or am I talking about black men? It's the same argument, and this is another reason I find the far left so reprehensible. They're so unbelievably powerful, and yet they're basically operating under the same principles as the Nazis.
Wow, I thought that we had come to an agreement that the use of Nazis was too common.
It is too common, but I'm actually talking about their actual political theory. I mean, they think it is genuinely right to collectivize races of people and then make judgments based on those whatever perceived characteristics those races had. The Nazis did it for the Jews, the progressives do it for the white people.
You said the issue of fatherlessness is the most important issue affecting men that people aren't talking about enough. Mm-hmm. Well, I know you're a father of two young children. You have a son and a daughter, and I heard you say before this interview, quite to my surprise, that you were more concerned about the future of your male child than the female one because he's a boy. And that's usually not a sentiment I hear. I think fathers tend to be a bit more protective of their daughters. And I'm wondering for you, why is it the other way around?
Well, I mean, being protective of the daughter is obviously something in a sort of individual capacity I will be. But I'm actually worried about my son's future because of the institutions of my country. Christina Hoff Sommers, I think, put it best when she said that and it's not just in America this happens, although the problem I think is way more pronounced over here, that we treat boys like defective girls. And I mean, if you look at sort of the gender ratios in schools, it's become overwhelmingly female. And I think that the culture and nature of the classroom is changing because of that. And certain things that were pretty regular, boisterous, boyish behaviours have become pathologized into, I mean, I don't think they'd call it toxic masculinity, but like they would say inappropriate behaviours, and this is what should be medicated against. And I think that's wrong. I don't think these are. I think these are natural expressions of the sort of energy that young men have. And I don't think we should treat them like there's something wrong with them. Young working class boys, white boys, are the second least achievers, the lowest achievers in my country, with the girls always consistently rising above them. And we've got much higher entry into university from women now, so women absolutely dominate the academy, and they're starting to naturally, I mean, young women between 22 and 30 out-earn their male peers. And I think this has not been organic. I think this has been part of a coordinated campaign by feminist advocacy groups, and it's starting to really impact young men in ways that they don't deserve, that are unfair.
Are you saying that men and boys are victim of a conspiracy?
No, not a conspiracy. Like it's a cultural paradigm that's imposed itself on what was a more free system.
So for people listening who may have political differences from you and may feel very uncomfortable that you're talking about very difficult subjects and might want to write you off as all those accusations that I listed earlier from some of those advocacy groups, what is your message to them to try to, I guess, maybe get your message across the divide?
I think the left has a real problem being able to accurately characterize its opponents. It's often done maliciously, and it's not to the left's own benefit. It's one of the reasons that you're losing. People are tired of being mischaracterized as a form of attack, but more importantly, the mischaracterizations, you're making people want to say that they are right-wing to get away from you and to distinguish themselves from you on purpose because of the awful way that left-wing activists act. And I mean, I shouldn't be sympathetic to your failing cause, but what you're doing is belligerent and inappropriate in what I would want us to all live in, which would be a free society. You can't protect people's feelings all the time, and it's not good for you to do so. Character comes from adversity. People become better people if they overcome difficulties in their life than if they are shielded from these difficulties in their life. And I don't think you're doing them any favours by being overly matronly with people. People are stronger than you think, and I think a philosophy of self-empowerment would do a lot more good in the world than this, what appears to me to be an ever-destructive identity cult.
Thank you for your time and speaking with me today.
My pleasure.
And that was Carl Benjamin, also known as Sargon of Akkad. If you enjoy the show, please consider becoming a supporter through Patreon or by giving a one-time gift on PayPal. As you can imagine, it takes a lot of time and resources to produce these episodes entirely on my own. Your support will really help me. You can find the links in the description.